Hi, I'm Deanne Akers-Lance from Canada Abroad, and today we are going to be answering one of the most commonly asked questions that we get from clients. Do you have a full checklist of all the documents that are required for an express entry application? And the short answer is no. And the reason for that is the government doesn't have one official checklist that you can access that is just for express entry. And the reason for this is those applying through the express entry system are all applying for different types of programs, whether it be federal skilled worker, federal skilled trades, the Canadian experience class, or provincial nominee. Each of those programs has separate requirements, and separate requirements mean different checklists. So what happens is any applicant who creates an express entry profile and then receives an invitation to apply based on their score, a new application gets created for their permanent residency. You then have to complete online application forms for the main applicant, spouse, and dependent children. And based on the information that you put into those application forms, after completion, an actual checklist is created. And then you upload all of your documents to that online checklist. But the issue is that checklist doesn't get created until you've completed the online application forms. And some people don't even know that that is going to happen. They complete their application forms, hit next, and think that they're ready to submit their application, and then see a whole lot of documents that they need to have ready for submission. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be going through all the documents, number one, that all applicants need, regardless of the program that they are using for express entry. So these are the mandatory documents that everybody has to have. And then we'll go through the program-specific documents for federal skilled workers, federal skilled trade, the Canadian experience class, and provincial nominees. And then also, depending on other factors in your background, such as having a Canadian relative, Canadian sibling, more specifically, there might be additional documents that you need, such as unabridged birth certificates to prove family relationship, proving proof of Canadian address, Canadian residency. So we're going to get into all of those things as well for people who might be claiming what we call adaptability points. For those who would like, we are going to be creating a PDF checklist of all of these documents that you can download from our website. The link will be in the description below the video. The first document that all applicants need is a valid travel document. So in most cases, this is going to be a passport. So you will be asked to upload a clear copy of your passport, and that's what we call the biodata page. So it has your photo, your name, date of birth, issue date, expiry date. And then if your passport has any pages with visas or stamps in them, you're going to be asked to upload those pages along with the biodata page. Now you have to merge all of these pages together into one document, and it has to be under 4 megabytes, and you need to be uploading that to the website once requested. Now, if you don't have an actual passport, you have a different type of travel document, it's fine, but you have to make sure that it is valid, has your photo and all the requested information, so name and date of birth. Now, you're going to want to make sure that your passport is valid for 6 months or longer after submitting that application. Now, in most cases, I would recommend that your passport is valid for at least 1 year after submitting your application. And the reason is when you submit your application and hopefully everything is approved, when they're ready to issue you with your immigrant visa, they can only issue it either for 1 year from the day of your medical or to the expiry of your passport. So even if your medical, was done very recently, if your passport's expiring in 6 months, when they issue that visa, it's only going to be valid until the end of your passport. For some people, this might result in you only having a week or so to then travel over to Canada and activate your permanent residency. So officially, it has to be valid for 6 months, but my recommendation, make sure it's valid for at least a year or longer. If the main applicant is married, they will have to provide a copy of their marriage certificate. Now, it doesn't have to be an unabridged marriage certificate. It just needs to be a valid marriage certificate. So depending on your country, they might, issue different types. As long as it's a valid marriage certificate, you can use that one, okay? And of note is, let's say that you are married And for the spouse, they've undergone a name change. So from their maiden name to their married name. They're going to be asked to provide a document for that legal name change. In that scenario, if it was just changed due to the marriage, you can use that marriage certificate as proof of the name change. Now, if you're not married, but you are common law, you are going to have to provide a statutory declaration of your common law union. And this is an actual application form that you can get from the government website ahead of time, or it'll be available once your checklist appears. You have to complete that with your common law partner, and it needs to be completed in front of a commissioner of oaths or a notary. It gets stamped and signed together. They then want that to be accompanied by supporting documents to prove the common law relationship. Now for Canada, common law means that you have been living together for a minimum of 12 months before submitting your application, and it's a permanent and genuine relationship. So you would have to have that statutory declaration and then other supporting documents to prove the cohabitation for the 12 months. So whether it's properties in each other's joint names, if it's a joint lease agreement, joint bank accounts, joint other statements, you're going to want to start accumulating those documents ahead of time and making sure that you're going to be able to prove on paper the genuineness of your relationship. If you were married and you're now divorced, or if you were married and you are unfortunately widowed, you will provide or have to provide documents for that as well. So a divorce decree or documents relating to the divorce, or a death certificate for your spouse if they have passed away as well. So you just need to be mindful that if it's not a marriage certificate that you have to submit, that you might have to submit those documents as well with your application. And if the main applicant is married to someone who was also previously married and divorced, or previously married and widowed, that spouse also needs to provide those divorce documents or the death certificate from their previous spouse. If the main applicant has children, then for the children's application, you will have to have unabridged birth certificates. So these are the birth certificates that list the details of both the father and the mother on them. Now, this is only for people 18 and under. So if you are the main applicant, you don't need an unabridged birth certificate because you're an adult. This is just for the accompanying dependent children. Now, another thing to note with the dependent children is, let's say you're the main applicant and maybe you do have dependent children, but they're not going to be accompanying you. You still have to list them in your application. And the reason for this is they have to be evaluated, because up until the age of 22, those children can still be sponsored to Canada under the family class. So they're going to still ask you to provide all the details and documents for those children so they can be evaluated. And the same applies if you are married or common law and you've listed your spouse as unaccompanying. You will still have to declare that spouse, provide their details and documents so they can be evaluated as well, because they can also be sponsored once you've got your permanent residency. Now you might be asking why somebody would do this, that they're married or common law, but they don't want to bring that person with them right now. Everyone has their own reasons, but one of the real beneficial reasons that we can think of right now is, for some people, if they're applying as a single applicant or applying as a married or common law applicant with a non-accompanying spouse, they get scored as a single applicant. And for some people, their comprehensive ranking system score is actually higher without that spouse being accompanying. So they might be doing that just to get that invitation to apply and get their permanent residency, and then bring the family over later, which you can also do. If your children were adopted, you have to be able to provide the official adoption documents. So adoption records, anything from the court. Depending on your country, each of these documents might be different. But if you list your child as adopted, then you will have to provide those official adoption records with the application as well. Next will be proof of education. So first of all, for the main applicant, you need to provide proof of completion of any education that you've claimed points for. And typically for all of the programs that we're going to go through, you're at least going to have to prove that you have high school or higher. So they would want your high school diploma, and then any other education you have, certificates, degrees, you need those copies as well. And as with all documents on your application, keep in mind anything you upload has to be in English or French. If it's not in English or French, it has to be accompanied by an accredited translation. So with the education, make sure that you've got the copies of each of your qualifications. If you have the transcripts available, upload those as well. And if you did an educational credential assessment, I usually recommend that you just upload it in one attachment with those qualification copies or transcripts as well. Now, if your spouse added any additional points for their education, same applies. You'll upload the copies of their qualifications, and then I recommend that you add the educational credential assessment with that document as well. Now, for anybody who's included in the application who is 18 years of age or older, they are going to have to provide a police clearance for every country that they have lived in for 6 months or longer in the past 10 years or since the age of 18, whichever is most recent. Now, for the country that you're currently living in, this police clearance is only considered valid for 6 months from the date that it's issued. For any country that you lived in previously but you're not currently residing in, you could go ahead and get those police clearances at any time, and they won't be considered to be expired as long as you have not lived in that country since they were issued. Now, some people, maybe you're on the international experience class, you're on a working holiday, and you've got your police clearance that was issued before you left for Canada. You can't use that, unfortunately, for your permanent residency application because that police clearance would have had to have been issued after you left the country. So let's say you're from the UK and you left the UK to go to Canada on February 25th, 2018. That police clearance would have had to have been issued after February 25th, 2018 to still be considered valid. So keep that in mind. If you do have old police clearances lying around, they may or may not still be valid for use, but the country that you're currently living in, that police clearance has to have been issued within the last 6 months, and that is at the date of application for your permanent residency, so not of creating the express entry profile. Now, if you know that you have a criminal record or you get one of these police clearances back and it has a surprise on it, you need to look at the offense that you were charged with, convicted of, whatever the situation is, when it occurred, and actually see if you might be inadmissible to Canada and that this may cause your application to be refused. In some cases, depending how long ago the offense was, you may not be inadmissible, or there might be a secondary type of application that you can do to overcome the admissibility. In cases like this is typically where you're going to need some kind of assistance from an immigration consultant such as myself or Canada Abroad to see if this is something that is going to be an issue on the application or not. And that applies for the main applicant or their accompanying spouse, or if they have a child, accompanying dependent who is 18 or over and also has a criminal record, this could become an issue. The next document that you will need for the permanent residency application is proof of an upfront medical exam. Now, this applies to the main applicant, any accompanying spouses, and any dependent children as well. Now, the medical has to be done by what's called a panel physician. So it just can't be your general doctor who does this. You need to go to Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada's website, search for a panel physician in your area, and go to one of the ones listed. When you go for the exam, they're going to give you proof that you went for the medical. It's a printout with your name, picture, and information. You use that form to upload as your proof of medical exam. If there's any additional tests that need to be done or are requested by the doctor, you're going to want to make sure that you comply and go back with those results or additional test results, because your application won't be processed until that is completed. But just in order to submit the application, you just need proof that you went for the medical before submitting your application. So it's proof of an upfront medical exam. And again, this would be for all applicants. Depending on your age, it's typically going to consist of a physical exam, a chest x-ray, and blood tests. Minor children don't typically need to go through the blood tests and the chest x-ray. For every family member that is included with the application, they will have to upload a digital photo. And with the checklist, they will give the requirements of the size of the photo and what specifications they have. But overall, you need to be against a white or close to white background, neutral face, no glasses, no head coverings, from the shoulder up, and no smiling. The next document that you will be requested to upload is proof of employment. Now, this is proof of the actual work experience. So right now we're not talking about job offers, we're just talking about proof of work experience. So any work experience that you have claimed for your profile and that you're receiving points for, you have to be able to verify that work experience. And what the government wants to see is a letter on official company letterhead from any of your employers that needs to confirm the dates that you worked for them, so start date to end date, your job title while you worked there, a brief list of the roles and responsibilities that you conducted while you worked there, and they want confirmation of how many hours per week you worked and that you were paid or what your salary was. If you took any extended leaves of absence, so maternity leave, extended sick leave, they would want those noted as well on the letters. And you'll need that from every employer that you are claiming points for your work experience. If you have that letter available, other documents that you could add if you have them, it's not mandatory, but the more you have, the better. Contracts, pay slips, tax documents, those are other things that you can put with that letter as well. Now, with these letters of work experience, you really want to make sure that the roles and responsibilities that the employer has put on there coincide with the occupation code that you have selected. Now, you absolutely do not want the employer to just copy and paste the main duties from the occupation code that you've chosen, because the government will not accept that. It needs to be in their own words. But if the officer finds that the letter does not support a claim under the occupation code that you've listed, your application could be refused. So just make sure that when you're creating your profile, that you know the occupation code you're choosing is going to be supported by what your employer says. If you're claiming any points for your spouse's or yourselves previous study or work history in Canada, you would want to make sure that you're going to be able to provide, number one, if it's work experience, the letter of reference from that Canadian employer. Number two, proof that that work was done on a valid work permit. If it was study, you'll want proof of the completed qualification. You'll need to know the designated learning institution number of that institution. And again, you would want to typically have that study permit, or at least a record, if you have it, to prove that that study was done on a valid study permit. Obviously, any work or study that was completed in Canada without a valid permit is not going to earn you any points. If you are claiming points for a Canadian relative, whether it's a sibling and you're claiming those points for the comprehensive ranking system, or you claimed points under the federal skilled worker point system for an aunt, an uncle, a niece, or a nephew, there's documents you have to submit to actually be given those points. So number one, you have to upload proof of that relative's Canadian status, whether it's Canadian citizenship or permanent residency. You have to provide proof that they are physically living in Canada, because if that relative is not living in Canada, you do not get the points. That relative, you need proof that they are over the age of 18. With the application, depending on the relationship, you have to prove the biological relationship. So if it's a sibling, it would be your unabridged birth certificate and then your brother or sister's unabridged birth certificate. If it was an aunt or an uncle, it would be the aunt or the uncle's unabridged birth certificate. your parents' unabridged birth certificate, and then your unabridged birth certificate. So in some cases, it's quite a few documents that you're going to need to prove this relationship. And this is one of the ones you definitely want to start working on as soon as possible to make sure you're going to have everything available to prove all of the elements to get those points. So if you can't prove the biological relationship, can't get the points. In some rare cases, with records in certain countries, if you can't get them, we have had cases where we've had to do DNA testing, and that has been sufficient. But that is something that you would have to request with the application and have proof that you couldn't submit the required documents. The government only has certain labs that they work with, so that's a little bit more of a complicated situation. But again, you have to make sure the relative is over the age of 18, they are physically living in Canada as a citizen or a permanent resident, and you can prove that relationship to you. Now, if any of the family members included in the application have undergone a name change, you will have to provide the official documentation to prove the name change. So in most countries, you would have done an application with the court and got an official record of that name change. You would have to provide those documents with the application. Because when you're doing the full permanent residency application, it does ask you to list your current name, and then if you've had any previous names. So name from birth, if you were married and divorced, your married name, your maiden name, your previous married name, you'd have to list all of those variations with the application as well. Now, if you're applying under the Federal Skilled Trades Program, you're either going to have to be submitting proof of your Canadian trade certificate or proof of your valid job offer in Canada from one or two employers. Now, if you have a Canadian trade certificate, you will upload the copy with your application as requested. If you didn't have the trade certificate, but you were eligible as a federal skilled tradesperson because of your valid job offer in Canada, then you are going to have to provide the documents for that offer. Now, you might either have one or two job offers, just depending on your situation. If it's two, then the documents we list, you would just upload for both jobs. So number one, you would have to upload the valid labor market impact assessment. You would have to upload the signed valid job offer. Now with that job offer, the offer has to be printed on the company's official letterhead and include information such as your start date, your position, salary, confirmation that you're going to be full-time paid, and that position is going to last for at least 1 year after receiving your permanent residency. They would also want to list, if you are currently working there, confirmation of that, and include your salary and any benefits that you're going to be receiving. Typically, they'd also want to put on there your details, your full details, so name, your contact information, and who you're going to be reporting to at the company. Now, if you're applying as a federal skilled worker, you have to prove that you have the required amount of settlement funds available based on your family size. Now, in order to prove these funds, they are going to ask for a variety of documents. Now, depending on the country that you live in and the banks that you work with, they might not always give you the documents in the specific format that the government is asking for. So you need to be mindful of that. If you can't get it in the exact format that the government is asking for, you need to just explain that with a document that you're going to put with what it is that you are providing them with. Now, what they specifically request to prove your settlement funds is a letter from the bank confirming all of your bank accounts with them and the current balance and the average balance over the last 6 months. They will ask for 6 months of bank statements for all of the accounts in your name. And you need to prove that the balance of all of these accounts, so adding up your assets and your liabilities, is equivalent to the required amount of settlement funds for your family size. If you don't have enough money your application will be refused because one of the requirements of the Federal Skilled Worker Program is that you have these settlement funds available. Now, they will not look at assets. So say you own a home and you've paid off X amount on your mortgage, they won't use that. It has to be liquid, readily available, and in an account that you can move at will. Some investment accounts will work because they might be 7 days notice to get the money out. That's fine. But something that has to be sold before you can get the value, they're not going to be able to look at that. Now, later on when we discuss provincial programs, there's going to be a few other requirements, such as seeing a certain balance over those 6 months of statements. But for federal skilled worker, the reason they're asking for those 6 statements is typically they want to see, number one, did you have the settlement funds that you stated when you created your express entry profile? Because when you created that profile, you signed an electronic signature saying that everything on your application was true and correct, and settlement funds was one of the key things that you had to put in there. So did you actually have the settlement funds when you created the profile and you received the invitation to apply? If they see any large sums deposited into your account, they may come back and request information where that money came from, most specifically because this money cannot be borrowed or taken out from the bank. So they might want to confirm, is this your money? Do you have to pay it back to somebody? They're going to want to confirm those things. So that's the real reason they're asking for those 6 months of statements. There isn't a certain balance that you had to hold for a full 6 months because you might have only gone into express entry 1 month ago. They just want to, again, check that this money is yours and it's freely and readily available for you to take with you to Canada to help get yourself established and set up once you get there. So right now you can be proactive and get a lot of these documents together before receiving your invitation to apply. But obviously with anything that's time sensitive, such as police clearances for the country that you currently live in, or medical examinations, you wouldn't want to go ahead and get those done right now because they might just expire and cost you extra money to do them again later. With anything that you can, try to get it done as soon as possible because once you receive that invitation to apply, you're only going to have 60 days to submit all of the documents for your permanent residency.